The skies over Pine Hollow were always gray in November. The trees stood bare, the wind sliced through coats like it had something to prove, and silence clung to the mountain town like wet wool. Yet on this particular day, the square was unusually crowded. Men leaned on fences. Women clutched shawls tighter around their shoulders. And at the center stood a raised wooden platform, weathered, creaking, and wrong. They called it a labor auction, but everyone knew what it really was, a last chance. Women who had no family, no food, and no other way to survive lined up and waited to be bid on for seasonal work, housekeeping, tending farms, caring for the sick. Some would be treated with dignity. Others, not so much. No one spoke of it after. It was a necessary shame. Among them stood a woman draped in a ragged gray dress, a burlap sack pulled over her head with two eye holes crudely cut out. She trembled, clutching a small satchel against her chest. The crowd whispered. Why is she hiding her face? She must be disfigured. Probably a criminal. No one bid. From the edge of the square stood Jeb Carter, a reclusive lumberjack known more for his silence than his words. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands like split logs and eyes the color of winter ice, he rarely came to town. But today, something drew him in. Maybe the wind whispered something. Maybe his loneliness finally ached too loudly. His gaze settled on the woman with the sack. Unlike the others, she didn't try to smile. Didn't plead. Just stood, quiet and still, like a battered statue refusing to fall. When the auctioneer barked, no bids. Going once, Jeb raised a calloused hand. $2, he said. Heads turned. Gasps echoed. A woman near the front laughed nervously. $2, the auctioneer repeated, half amused. You serious, Carter? Jeb nodded once. The gavel dropped. The woman flinched. She was his now. As she stepped off the platform, still clutching her satchel, still hidden beneath the sack, the crowd parted in awkward silence. No applause. No congratulations. Only pity. Disgust. Jeb didn't look at them. He just turned and walked toward the forest trail, slow and steady. The woman followed, her footsteps quiet behind his. Not a word passed between them. But in the thick hush of the woods, something ancient and broken began to shift, like the soft crack of ice under spring's first sun. Jeb's cabin stood deep in the woods, far from town, nestled between tall pines and wild blackberry bushes. Built by his own hands, it was simple, one room, stone hearth, creaky floorboards, but it was warm, honest. Like him. The woman stepped in hesitantly. She didn't remove her sack. She clutched her small satchel as if it held her soul. Jeb said nothing, only nodded toward the corner where a cot had been prepared, a woven quilt folded neatly on top. She bowed slightly in thanks and lowered herself onto it, turning her face away. That first night, the fire cracked between them like a line neither dared cross. Jeb sipped tea from a tin mug. The woman sat with her back straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. No name. No voice. Just presence. But for Jeb, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, familiar, in a way sadness often is. The next morning, he rose early for work in the forest. When he returned, damp and aching from the cold, something was different. The cabin smelled of stew. His boots were by the door, cleaned. A pile of chopped wood sat by the fireplace. She moved like a shadow, silent but purposeful, tending to the room like she belonged there, yet never meeting his eyes. Jeb watched quietly. Each day followed the same rhythm. He left. She stayed. When he returned, meals were warm, water was drawn, and the hearth always had a gentle flame flickering within it. He noticed her fingers, nimble, scarred, strong. Her posture, alert but guarded, like someone used to flinching. She never touched his things. Never asked questions. And still, not a single word. On the 7th day, he left a book on the table. Wuthering Heights. Not because he thought she would read it, but because it was the only one he owned. The next morning, he found it open to chapter 3. He began leaving more, a comb carved from pine, wildflowers in a cup, a new shawl. She never acknowledged them, but none were returned. She folded the shawl gently. She tended the flowers. He never asked her to speak. Never reached for the sack. But in her quiet labor, something more powerful than words was blooming. Loneliness had brought her to his door. But dignity, Jeb realized, might keep her there. The storm came without warning. Dark clouds rolled over Pine Hollow like a stampede of angry beasts. Thunder cracked across the sky. Rain fell in violent sheets, drowning the forest in gray. Jeb had barely made it back to the cabin before the worst of it hit, soaked to the bone, breathless. Inside, the woman had already lit the fire, her movements quicker now, more confident. She handed him a towel, still silent. He peeled off his drenched coat and boots as she brought a cup of hot broth and set it near him. He nodded gratefully, his teeth chattering from the cold. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the inside of the cabin. Jeb noticed her trembling, not from fear, but something else. Her fingers clutched her sleeves tightly. Her breath came shallow. She stared into the fire like she was trying not to remember something. The wind howled outside. Trees groaned. The cabin shook. And then, in a voice so soft it nearly blended with the storm, she spoke. "My name is Anna." Jeb turned slowly, careful not to startle her. It was the first time he'd heard her speak. Her voice was small, dry from disuse, but steady. She didn't stop there. "I was a preacher's daughter. From Ashridge. My father believed I was cursed after the fire. Said I'd brought shame to the family by surviving." Jeb said nothing, only listened. "My husband said it. Drunk. Angry. I tried to leave. He poured oil around the house and lit it." Her voice broke. "I got out. Barely. But my face, the left side, it scared people. It still does." She touched the edge of the sack, as if debating whether to pull it off. "I've worn this ever since. Even when I ran. Even when I worked in barns or cleaned for men who wouldn't look me in the eye unless they wanted something." Jeb leaned forward, his voice gentle as falling snow. "You don't have to tell me more." But she shook her head. "I want to. Because you never asked. You never stared. You treated me like I mattered." The storm outside seemed to quiet for a moment, as though the forest was listening too. "I'm tired of hiding," she whispered. And with trembling fingers, she began to untie the sack. Jeb looked away. Not out of disgust, but to give her the choice. When she finished, she turned to him. He met her gaze. The left side of her face was deeply scarred, skin tight and uneven, fire's cruel fingerprint. But her eyes, they were soft, amber like honey, full of pain and quiet strength. And Jeb, after a long silence, said only this. "You're still the most human face I've seen in years." The days after the storm carried a strange peace, like something had settled between them that no longer needed words. The sack was gone. Anna no longer shrank from the world. She moved freely through the cabin now, brushing her fingers along the bookshelves, humming softly while stirring stew. Her hair was tied loosely back with twine. She even stepped outside to collect rainwater and herbs, letting the forest see her face. And Jeb never once looked away. He worked during the day, but his pace slowed. He found himself taking longer paths home, collecting wildflowers that bloomed even in the frost, carving tiny animals from scrap wood to leave on the windowsill. Little things. Gentle things. One crisp morning, Anna stood outside under the frost-covered branches, her breath forming little clouds. She stared at the rising sun, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Jeb watched her from the doorway for a while before stepping out with something in his calloused hand. "Anna," he said quietly. She turned. He held out a small wooden box, smooth and sanded, carved with leaves and a single pine tree on top. "For you." She opened it slowly. Inside was a ring, simple, made of polished birchwood, warm to the touch. No stones. No gold. Just honest craftsmanship, shaped with time and care. "I'm not good with speeches," Jeb said, shifting his weight awkwardly, eyes down. "But I've known loneliness longer than I care to admit. It's loud. Heavy. It steals the color from things." Anna's breath hitched. "You brought the color back," he continued. "Not because you served me, or worked for me. But because you were here. Because you are who you are." He swallowed, then added, "I don't need to see your face to know what I feel. I knew it the moment I saw you standing there, not begging, not crying, just, standing." Tears welled in Anna's eyes. "I don't have money," Jeb said softly. "I don't have land or fine things. But I can offer you honesty. Safety. A place where no one will ever ask you to hide." She looked down at the ring, then back at him, this tall, rough man with the quiet soul and the soft eyes. "You'd marry a woman like me?" she asked, voice trembling. Jeb stepped closer. "I'd marry the bravest person I've ever met." She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then, in a voice full of something neither of them had dared feel in years, hope, she whispered, "Yes." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as gently as if she were made of glass. In the woods around them, snow began to fall, light, soft, and silent. Like a blessing. Years passed like seasons in Pine Hollow, quiet, steady, full of small wonders. Anna never wore the sack again. She wore scarves in winter, flowers in spring, and sometimes nothing at all to hide her scars. And the town? It changed too. Slowly. Awkwardly. But it changed. At first, people stared. Whispered. Some crossed the street when she came into the general store. But Anna always held her head high, her hand often resting in Jeb's as they walked the muddy path into town. She brought fresh bread to the elderly. She stitched quilts for new mothers. She taught reading to children whose fathers couldn't afford school. Her voice, once hidden beneath fear and cloth, became known for its calm grace and laughter that warmed even the coldest faces. The same people who once avoided her began to greet her. Some even asked for advice. No one dared call her scarred anymore. She was Anna. The kind woman who had turned Jeb Carter's lonely old cabin into a home full of music and firelight. Jeb, for his part, never changed much. He still chopped wood at sunrise, still brought her flowers from the woods. But there was more light in his eyes. More ease in his step. The man who once lived in silence now hummed songs under his breath as he carved animals and letters into walking sticks he gifted to the children. One day, a small girl tugged on Anna's skirt and asked, "Were you ever a princess before you came here?" Anna laughed and knelt down. "No, sweet pea. But I did get rescued by someone kind." The girl looked confused. "A prince?" "No," Anna smiled. "A lumberjack." Jeb watched from the porch as his wife knelt in the garden, surrounded by wild roses and children, her scars glowing gold in the setting sun. He didn't need to speak. His heart said it all. She had once been sold for $2. Now, she was priceless. In a cabin deep in the woods, where broken things were never discarded, the forest had learned something from her. That even what's burned can still bloom.